Okay, so today we're looking at the interwar years, which is the age of anxiety. And we're going to see that after the war, many people had sacrificed. So just imagine I asked you for one day to sacrifice and eat no food. How are you going to act the next day? You're going to eat everything in sight, right? And so that's what the 1920s is going to be. People, because of the scarcity of war, they're going to try to live their life to the max. So you probably know of things like flappers and the jazz era, right? You've probably heard of a book called The Great Gatsby, right? And people are indulging in the 1920s. People are trying to make a lot of money in the 1920s, which is going to lead to a stock market crash. And it's this crash that is going to lead to totalitarian governments coming in and taking over. And that will lead us at 39 to the commencement of World War II. So our economy has an effect. But what was the big overarching effect that Germany will feel that will galvanize the war? Treaty of Versailles. So let's go through the age of anxiety. And many people have this pessimism about the war because they were told by their country this was going to be the war to end all wars. Really? Is it? No. No, because we already know from the Treaty of Versailles that that kind of sets up World War II and a checklist for Hitler of everything to violate. We also know that people start to question their belief in God. Because how could God allow for these new mechanisms of guns be created and take out all this amount of life? How could God perpetuate this war? And we're going to see that people begin to question religion and that God's kingdom, it goes beyond this world as well. We're going to see the attack on progress, which is kind of coupled with what we saw in war technology. And also people start to question democracy and it not working, and this is why people will go to other forms of government, such as fascism, communism, and socialism. We're going to have a revolution in thinking. First off, y'all probably saw Albert Einstein on y'all study guide. Y'all are in, what subject are y'all in this year? Chemistry. Next year you take physics, and a lot of the stuff that he has discussed in this book is the basis for physics. Hey, you probably know that equation E/mc squared, right? But he's going to come up with this idea, which will be the foundation of physics, that things move, and depending on what speed we're moving, it has a different movement. Okay? So y'all have ever heard those equations that there's a train moving one way at one speed and a train moving another way at another speed? When will they arrive at each other? That's that dude. Okay? If you want to blame any of those math, have you ever seen that in algebra and stuff like that, those equations? That's this dude, okay? If you want to blame anything for your bane of your existence. And then next year, when you get into physics, all this guy. The other guy we're going to talk about, I don't know how many of you are taking psychology this year? Any of y'all? Okay, you're Miss Luke or in the Indian Scholars? Okay, well, y'all have basically Sigmund Freud and William James have created the field of psychology. Sigmund Freud is going to say that if we started to understand people a little bit better, we would have less conflict. And this is coming out of the war. And he's going to say we start looking at ideas to understand people. And like there's going to be certain ones that you'll if you ever take psychology, either for dual credit or for the regular class, they talk about the id, the ego, and the superego. And that's how people convey themselves. Also, he talks about complexes like the Oedipus Rex complex. Have you ever heard of that before? Mm-hmm. That all boys will fall in love with a woman like their mom. That's so true. That's so true. So you're attracted. And he says there's certain things, or if their mom was a certain way, they're going to fall in with someone completely opposite. And he's going to look at that there's ways to quantify people, that you could look at certain behaviors and we could find certain mental illnesses. And he's going to say people are mentally ill because society is so prude. And if society is so prude, preventing these people from acting on their vices, they are going to get mentally ill. He basically creates the justification for the 1920s behavior because he's going to say if you don't act on it, what's going to happen to you? It's going to make you ill. And so this leads to the psychoanalysis. He's going to eventually look at dreams and saying that dreams are your subconscious trying to tell you what you have been suppressing all day. And so this is going to lead into the field of psychology. It will later lead into psychiatric help. And this all stems from what the war's impact will be on our soldiers. Because a lot of those soldiers will come home and they're going to experience what y'all know as PTSD. But we didn't quantify it that at that time. It was going to be called shell shock. That all of these guys have said that they got scared, they heard a loud noise, and they were hiding. And this is what's going to lead to the field of us looking at those soldiers and trying to help them. So if you're interested in psychology, Ms. Luke has, it is an elective next year, which is a really good class. The other thing that's going to come out is our art is going to change. We've traditionally had art that was it showed everything in the greatest light. But in the 1920s, because we've experienced the war, our art is going to change to show the horrors of the war. So this one is actually after the war. It is when Germany has invaded Spain, and this is the Battle of Guernica. And we know this is at Cubism with Pablo Picasso. Another one is Impressionism, right? It's showing the distortion of what we trip. It looks kind of pretty, right? Okay, so y'all know Starry Night. That's another Impressionist one. Okay, how many of you have ever seen Jackson Pollock? He's the guy who throws the paint at the pictures. That's another thing that comes out at this time. Okay, we also see pop art come out. Have you ever seen like Andy Warhol? Yeah, that also comes out. We're gonna see abstraction. That people are not seeing reality the same because the war has really impacted them. We're going to move away from Greco-Roman type structures with the Roman columns and the arches to more stale impersonal buildings that function just to fit more people in. So they're going to look sleek, and they're going to kind of look like really that's just a building with windows, right? Does it look anything nice? Huh?
It looks like a building in Dallas.
It looks like a building in Dallas. And this is the modern movement. This is going to be called mid-century and modern type of architecture. Okay, so there's a lot of fun that goes on in the 1920s, such as jazz coming out, people living at their whim, people investing in the stock market, but all of this comes to a crash with people stop trading with each other, high tariffs get in place, overproduction. And we're going to see that things in Europe are not improving because in the Treaty of Versailles, what country had to pay reparations? Germany. Who did Germany have to pay reparations to? The Allies. They had to pay money to the Allies. I'm just going to put a big A. Okay? And then the Allies owed money to who?
The U.S.
The U.S. Okay? So Germany needs to get its economy off the ground. Can it?
No.
So the U.S. gets the pea brain of the idea that our businessmen will make loans to Germany to fund their industrialization so they could get off the ground, so they can make reparations to pay for damages to repair what they did to the Allies. The Allies could pay back us. Does Germany do this?
No.
No, we talked about this, leading to them industrializing, leading to their massive military mechanism, and we basically started World War II, brought to you by the U.S. because they don't pay back the Allies don't pay back us, and it stays in Germany.
I tried to explain this to my parents, and they're just like, that's not true.
It's in the book, and we'll see this next year. It's called the Dawes Plan in American History, right? Or the Dawes Act, not the Dawes Plan, not the Dawes Act, because the Dawes Act deals with the Native Americans. So basically, these reparations never get paid back. And this is what's going to lead to American businessmen saying, well, we don't want to loan to Germany anymore. And then other countries not wanting to loan to other nations, which stifles our economy and causes it to decline. Eventually, Germany has just paid us back that money 10 years ago. That was their final payment. They finally paid it back.
So in 2009, they paid us back?
Yes. We also have an agricultural crisis. Remember, we talked about our farmers being super important in World War I to feed not only our soldiers and European soldiers, but Europe across the board, because most of them were in total war, a war of attrition. And so our farmers did not stop producing. They kept on producing, and so there's going to be a huge amount of resources. So what's going to happen to the price? It's going to go down because they have a lot. And so now we're going to see that our farmers are going to suffer and be impoverished because they've overproduced. All of this stuff is going to couplate in making the Great Depression worse. Overproduction, payment of loans, restricting of trade because of tariffs. But what made it really worse was the stock market crash. And it happened in America, but you have to realize that other countries are investing in America. And let me explain this practice that happens to relate to how it dealt with the stock market. Okay, so if you are a farmer, do you want a heavier cow or a lighter cow? Why do you want a heavier cow?
More meat.
More meat, and so when you sell it, when it gets weighed, what happens to the price? Okay, and so one of the things that farmers used to do, and I know this sounds like I'm going off on a tangent, but this is going to explain the stock market. One of the things that farmers used to do before cattle used to get weighed is they used to feed them salt. And what would that cause the cattle to do? We'll get fat, because what are they going to do before they get weighed on? Take in water. So you ever heard of water weight? Yeah, so they take in all the salt, they drink all this water, they get on the scale, and now they're heavier, but are they truly heavier?
No.
No, and that is exactly what happens to the stock market. People are going to start buying stock, and it's going to cause businesses to inflate the stock value. Is the stock really worth as much?
No.
No, it's just like what they did with the cattle. It is actually worth less. And so when people start buying it and the price keeps on going up and up and up, did the stock actually have that value?
No.
And so when it reaches its highest, the person at the end really wants to sell it, right? And he sells along with everybody else at the same time. But the stock did not have that value, so what does it cause with the stock market? It crashes because we are not having truthful reporting on the value of stock. Eventually, the U.S. government is going to create an organization, an agency, to make sure that there's truthful in reporting on the value of your stock and the value of your company, which we call the Securities and Exchange Commission. This is why Martha Stewart gets in trouble, because she does insider trading, and she knew stuff about the value of her stock falling in the near future, and that's why she goes to jail. Okay? But do y'all understand why the stock market crash was so big? Because on the first day of Black Tuesday, which was the last question at the end, people started selling. And then it leveled out. And then people were like, oh my gosh, what if it crashes again? And then everybody went to sell their stock, and that's what caused the big crash. Okay? Are we good with this one? You'll see this next year again in U.S. history, whichever one you take. Okay, so because of what is going on with overproduction and tariffs, we're going to see business activities going to decline. And when people stop demanding stuff, what do businesses do with workers? They lay them off. And y'all saw over 330 million people were unemployed, right? 38% of the world population, 25% in the U.S. were unemployed. The only nation unaffected by the Depression was the Soviet Union. And the reason why... Remember, they get out of the war in 1917? And they're going to industrialize. They're going to move people off the farms and have a little bit of people working on the farms and move everybody into the industry, so is everybody employed during the Depression. That is why they're not hurt by the Great Depression. So it looks like what works if they're the only nation unharmed. What government type? Socialism, communism works, right? Okay, so we're going to see the social effects of the Depression is that people, many men are going to be out of work, and that's what's going to be included in our unemployment. People are going to lose their homes, they're going to move into shanty towns, suicide rates rise up, we're going to see there's going to be class divisions, and there is a guy who's going to write about this. You probably know him because y'all just read his book of Mice and Men, right? John Steinbeck. Okay, I want us to look at this so you could understand. Do y'all know what wrath is?
No. Anger.
Extreme anger, right? And I want you to understand why people in America are angry at our government. It says the people come with nets to fish for potatoes. Why are they coming to fish for potatoes?
Food.
Food. What has happened to their family and their jobs? They've lost it. So they're coming to fish for potatoes in the river, and the guards hold them back. So can they even get to the food? No. They come in rattling cars to get the dumped oranges. But the kerosene is sprayed. Y'all know what kerosene is?
Isn't it flammable?
It's very flammable. We use it in lamps. So they're putting this on the food. So can the people get to the food?
No.
Are they hungry?
Yes.
Do they need it?
Yes.
Because they don't have what?
Food.
Jobs. Okay, and they don't have food too, yes. And they stand still and watch the potatoes float by. They listen to the screaming of the pigs being killed in the ditch covered with quicklime. Okay, so they're killing the pigs. Those pigs could be eaten, right? But they're purposely making the food what? Unedible. They watch as mountains of oranges slope down the purifying ooze. In the eyes of the people, there is failure. And in the eyes of the hungry, there is a growing wrath. In the souls of the people, the grapes of wrath are filling the growing heavy for the vintage.
What's quicklime?
Huh? Quicklime is just something that helps you get rid of something, and it helps it decompose faster. So now, what are the farmers doing with the food? Are they allowing it for consumption? No, they're ruining it. And it's going to be because the government is going to pass an act called the Agriculture and Adjustment Act that's going to pay farmers to get rid of their crops while people are going what?
Hungry.
Do you think this is going to be popular? No, and slowly people are going to start looking at the U.S. government as not providing a good solution. They should be giving this food out. Yes, Hannah?
I don't understand why they would make that act. Like, is that
Okay, so now that we get rid of all these oranges, all those potatoes, all those pigs, what has happened to the amount of food farmers have? There's not as much, right? So there's less, so what happens to price? That's why the government is doing it. Is the Agriculture and Adjustment Act going to be popular? No, and so this is why eventually the Supreme Court will declare it unconstitutional. But they're trying to create artificial scarcity, and John Steinbeck in his book is revealing how the people felt about it. And do you think these people, are they gonna endorse democracy? And this is why in the 30s we will see the commencement of the Communist Party in America, because of the policies that Roosevelt came up with in his New Deal. And this Roosevelt, the one that was in the wheelchair. This is John Maynard Keynes. John Maynard Keynes is going to tell him that the government, it used to be that they never dealt with depressions, that they just let the economy fix itself. But John Maynard Keynes is going to say the government should stimulate the economy by creating jobs. How many of you have ever heard of Hoover Dam? That was one of the projects that came out of this time that is going to employ people. People have what in their pocket now? Money. What can they do with that money? Buy stuff, spend stuff, and what is that going to do with their economy? Lift it up. And they come out with this idea, and this is what's going to lead to works projects, which you will discover next year. The most unpopular one was the AAA, because what were they doing to the food? They were destroying it when people were going hungry. So now we're going to look at the Bolshevik Party and why they got out of the war in 1917. And there is a revolution. We know the Romanov dynasty is getting taken out, right?
Yeah.
And this new group of people in this Communist Party are upset about the war because there's high death tolls, right? They were also upset, but prior to this, because of the working conditions. And we're going to see that this is going to lead to Lenin coming to power, which we talked about in 1905, that precursor. 1917, he's fully in power. And we're going to see he's going to take out the opposition. Who do you think the opposition is, the poor or the rich? The rich. And this is what the reign of the Red Terror campaign is. He's taking out the white party. And eventually we are going to see within this conflict, he will reduce the enemies of the state and create a political system that will be socialistic and have the foundations of communism. So this war, we're going to see he's going to filter everything to the government. The government will control the banks. They will control the industries. They will control the farms. They will control all of it. Who's going to be upset? The working class and the poor, or the rich? The rich, because he's basically taking the stuff away from them and the government is owning it. And we're going to see the property held by the lower classes is exempt. Again, we are seeing Lenin is speaking to our working class and poor. We're going to see he seizes crops so he could feed people who are hungry. Okay, is he doing the opposite of what the U.S. did? In the U.S., what did they do to the excess crops? Burn them. Here, he's taking them to feed the poor. And we're going to see that communism will take hold. And he's going to do his new economic plan that basically restores a little bit of private industry because he knew the elites were getting upset with him. And the peasants could sell their agricultural surplus. So the money, the food he was taking away, he's going to allow them to sell. Eventually, Lenin will die because of a power struggle, and this power struggle will have a little political vacuum, and eventually Joseph Stalin will come in. And you have to know this 5-year plan. I'm promising you will see it on the test. He is going to industrialize the Soviet Union. So he needs to move people off the farm. So he's going to industrialize the farm, so y'all know all of this John Deere stuff, right? Tractors and the pickers. He will industrialize the farm. And this will lead to the collectivization of agriculture. That the government owns the land and they will provide the resources to the farmers to be effective. Do they need as many farmers? And so those farmers can now go into industry and work, and they will be fed. Okay? This is what's creating the foundation of his first 5-year plan to industrialize Russia. And it will be effective. But did it rely on the farmers? And we're going to see the wealthy peasants will be upset about what is going on because they're being taken. And so people who rise up will be purged out of their society because he does not want resistance. Eventually, anybody who's talking out against him, he will censor the newspapers. And this will create his cult of consciousness that basically only publishes information that he likes. Is he cracking down on the government, on opposition? Anybody who's seen as opposing will be taken to Serbia. Okay? Even those close to him that he feared could rise up in power, he removes through assassination attempts. And also, we're going to see he does have labor camps, and he does bring out this racial cleansing idea, which is going to be synonymous with the other groups of people. But you'll have to know that racial cleansing actually happened in America with the eugenics movement that will be here in the United States. All of these other people start looking at cleansing as something that needs to happen after we've seen the war. And I'm going to talk about the war and the cleansing and the growth of the family in a second. Okay? So the other group of people we have to look at is Italy. Italy is going to do something a little bit different than socialism and communism. Again, in communism, everything was coming to the government. The government was filtering everything out. And it was creating an equal society of socialism. However, fascism, it brings everything to the government, but it's a military state. Okay? We're going to see that they work against political change. Anybody who talks out against the government is thoroughly repressed. Does this kind of sound like communism? And the reason why they're similar, because these are totalitarian governments. Where these guys call totalitarian because they want total power. And are they going to oppress the other people? So democracy will be out. And these are going to be new form ideologies that come out because they're going to have, these guys will say that they will have the solution to the depression. Our next guy we're going to look at is Adolf Hitler. We see that he was involved in World War I. He was a soldier. Prior to getting involved in the war, he was at the Art Institute. Okay? We're going to see that his father died, so he cannot continue at the Art Institute. He tries to get a job. And he starts to realize the plight of the working class. They want what to happen with their pay? Higher pay. What do they want to happen with working hours? Lower, better working conditions. And this is why he becomes the chairman of the Nationalist Socialist German Workers' Party, which will eventually be the foundation for socialism and eventually the Nazi Party. When he does become head of this party, he's appealing to certain people, the lower middle class who want better working conditions, better pay, lower hours. He tracks those who feel alienated from society, specifically the Germans, because what has happened to their realm? They've been lost their land, right? We're going to see their anger over the Treaty of Versailles is what's going to be their propaganda. They are struggling economically because this depression is worldwide except for what country? Soviet Union. And he's going to use the Treaty of Versailles as the foundations to re-galvanize, put people in the military, and all of a sudden the depression will be over very quickly here. And there's fighting between political parties. Eventually, when he becomes the chancellor, he will get rid of the second opposition party. We're gonna see, I know y'all studied this last year with Miss Minton, the anti-Semitism movement. And again, it comes from that racial cleaning, racial hygiene that happens. So how many of you have ever heard of beauty pageants? Beauty pageants take off in this time period as a way to talk about pedigree. It's like a dog show. You know how they look at dogs and there's certain characteristics that they look at to say that this is the best one of their breed? That is exactly what a beauty pageant is at this time. And people will get little medals, not to say they're the most beautiful, but they have the best pedigree. Eventually in the U.S., I will take you further down the channel of eugenics. We're going to see he will consolidate his power by getting rid of the liberal opposition. This new Weimar Republic that had a constitutional government that established a Bill of Rights to the people, he will eliminate that. We're going to see he outlaws other parties. Basically, is he getting total power? Yes. He is a totalitarian, just like Benito Mussolini and Joseph Stalin and Lenin. We're going to see he destroys trade unions, basically purging society of all of the growth that has happened under the Weimar Republic. And he takes total control of the police force. Okay, this is what you'll eventually see on the backside of your study guide, but you have to understand what happens at the end of World War I to our population. What happens at the end of World War I to the population across the world? Significantly drop because we know the death of our soldiers. Eventually, we know that the U.S. enters the war in 1917. And one of the things when our soldiers come to from the United States to Europe, there are some soldiers who have the flu. And when they come in, they bring the flu, and once the war is over in 1918, what do all these soldiers take back home?
The flu.
And this is why it's going to be known as the 1918 pandemic, because it's worldwide, but there's only one nation reporting on it, and it's Spain. So the flu will be called the Spanish flu, but was it really Spanish? No. Okay?
American.
It was American, and I'll show you something from the Smithsonian. They have a little video on this. But now, because all the world's population has declined, many nations start looking at regrowing our population. Even here in America, they start putting restrictions on people who you could marry. You could only marry within your ethnic class. Okay? They start putting restrictions on that. In Germany and other countries, we're going to see that they're going to honor women who have more kids. And this is going to be a nationalistic. It's very patriotic in this propaganda. On Hitler's mother's birthday, he will honor women who have. They would get a Bronze Star if they have 4 children, a Silver Star if they have 6, and a Gold Star, which is the Rabbit of Dedication, if they had 8 or more. Okay? Okay. And this is going to filter into that whole pedigree that I talked about in the eugenics movement. Eventually, next year, we will watch a video on this, okay, on eugenics and how it filtered in that certain races are inferior, which should bring in the overtones of social Darwinism. Yes, ma'am?
Why didn't he like Jews? That's like my main question about Hitler.
And a lot of it dealt with the eugenics because they felt that when the Jewish Pale was created out of Poland, that is taking land away from the Germans. Because remember, there was all these ethnic groups like the Serbians who were saying that they should have nationalistic, they should have their own nation. So with the Treaty of Versailles, land was taken away from them for the Jewish Pale settlement, which is Poland. And that's what leads to this resentment against the Jewish people. And then he leads the eugenics movement trying to look at why they are racially inferior, which will be the next few slides I have. Okay? And so do you understand the prejudice now? Their land has been taken away, which created the Jewish Pale of Poland. And so what we see, the Nazi Party will start initializing measures to suppress the Jewish people within that area. And they want to remove them because they want to reunite the Aryan race that has been broken up because of the Treaty of Versailles, what we saw in our map. And so the only way to unite these people is to get rid of these people out of Germany. And we're going to see they put up discriminatory laws to determine who is Jew. We know this is the star. We also see that they do the Nuremberg laws, which they deprive them of their citizenship in Germany. We're going to see they prohibit marriages between races. Isn't this happening everywhere else?
Yes.
And is this a continuation of social Darwinism?
Yes.
Okay. We also see that they start attacking Jewish communities. Okay? And y'all studied this last year about the ghetto, right?
Yeah.
It was one of the things in Ms. Mitten's class, so I'm not going to go to that much in depth. And we're going to see, in order to get this area, they're going to start doing things that are unbecoming. And this is what's going to lead to a lot of Jewish people fleeing. They will go to Mexico. They will go into, there's like a huge Jewish settlement in Mexico. Okay? They will try to seek asylum in the United States.
But we won't let them in.
Okay, we won't let them in, and that's what you'll find out next year. And a lot of it stems from our eugenics movement that is happening in America. So, okay, now this is, do y'all remember who controlled India? Britain. They controlled India because what did India provide for the British Empire? The opium that they traded with who?
China.
Okay, now we have seen in one of our documents of the DBQ that how were the Indians treated by the British Empire when they entered the war? Do y'all remember that document that they were in that truck and they were going to go to sleep? And that no one wanted to sleep next to the Indian guy, that they slept on the other side, so that made him feel inferior. Did this letter get home?
No.
So eventually when our soldiers get home, they're going to convey this idea that they were going into this war for equality, but they were treated unjustly. And this is what's going to start the commencement for India's independence movement. And we're going to see that the British are going to try to keep India. And one of the things is they're going to establish a national congress. Let them have a little bit of sovereignty. And amidst this sovereignty, there's going to be a schism. Because there are two dominant religions in India. Do y'all remember them?
Hinduism and Buddhism. Oh, and Islam.
And Islam. Okay, Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism. Which one do you think is going to have the least amount of people? Buddhism. So it's basically Islam versus what? Hinduism. And this is going to lead a schism in this National Congress. We're going to see Gandhi is going to say, look guys, if we keep on fighting each other, who still keeps to dominate us? Great Britain. And so this is what will lead to working against each other and trying to create unity. He also talks about racial segregation. Remember the caste system? Who was at the bottom that we racially segregated? Untouchables. And he's going to try to stop that racial injustice. Also, he's going to work into a policy of toleration between the religions. We're going to see he wants us to be able to achieve independence through peaceful civil disobedience rather than fighting amongst each other. And he's going to transform the National Congress into an organization that will focus on Indian nationalism, India for Indians. And we're going to see the movement will eventually appeal to the lower class, but there is going to be a problem because there's going to be fighting between the Muslims and the Hindus on who should control. And eventually the Indian Act is created, which will allow self-government, but it's going to split up India and Pakistan. Pakistan will be what religion?
Islam.
Islam. And what will India be? Hindu. Just FYI, this is going to be the impact of this.
Is Hindu the one that has the god with a bunch of hands?
Arms and all this stuff that they have 5,000 gods.
They have like
And they're all different different frames of reference of the god Vishnu. Okay? Okay, so do y'all get this? If you were to see it later on a multiple guess, you know why they were divided. Okay, so China. We know China, what has happened to China in the age of exploration and imperialism?
Basically, they got taken over.
They've gotten taken over, and we know that the Europeans or Chinese dominate China. Europeans through the Treaty of Nanjing, right? And eventually, we're going to see that provincial warlords are going to try to regain control. And they know the only way to regain control is controlling the trade, controlling the opium, and the economic investment in the area. But the Treaty of Nanjing, the Treaty of Unequal Treaties, is what's leading to the decline of the economic development. And so this is what's going to lead to a nationalistic movement in China. China for the Chinese people. And there's two different views, but before we get to the two different views, you have to know about the May 4th movement. That people start protesting against the foreign influence, which we've seen before in the Boxer Rebellion and the self-strengthening movement. We're going to see this is going to be led by students saying that they should have democracy for the Chinese people, which will eventually lead to two different leaders taking hold who will have a fight against each other on who should dominate China. One will be Chiang Kai-shek, JJ for short. He's going to say China should be a nationalistic nation that will be democratic. However, there's this other guy named Mao Zedong saying we should endorse communism, but in agrarian style. Is this the communism of what we see Stalin doing? No, Stalin is industrializing. These two guys will go into a schism. We will see Mao Zedong will win, and Chiang Kai-shek and his nationalistic people will be thrown out of China into a nation you know as Taiwan. Okay? And that is the official China all the way up until the 1970s that the U.S. will recognize. Okay, now we've gotten done with this. Okay. Yes.